If you've ever used an official Pathfinder 2nd Edition module in Foundry, you'll know how amazing they are. The journal text has been edited so that you can send role links to the chat for your players. Locations and items are linked so that looking up relevant information or rules is only a click away. Most impressive is the way that the module journals have been meticulously prepared to look like the actual adventure PDF or book from Paizo themselves. This is the ultimate way to run these adventures. Unfortunately, Paizo has shown no interest in adapting pre-remaster adventures into official modules, which leaves us with tools like FryGuy's PDF to Foundry, or waiting for a re-release that may never come. PDF to Foundry is an excellent tool, but it primarily imports the raw text and images, and the journals it creates are aesthetically lacking and can be hard to navigate. While these are fine for immediate use, they leave a lot to be desired in presentation and function. If only there were a way to make these journals look and act as good as the official ones. I have good news.
You got the touch. You got the
Arise, Rodimus Prime.
Optimus. Yeah!
I can teach you this power, but it is a complicated process that I want to split over several videos to chunk the knowledge into digestible pieces. I hope this will make it easier to refer back to. Additionally, I've written up this guide in a text form on my GitHub with a tutorial.css file you can use to get started. The guide has embedded links and code blocks to be as useful as possible. In this video, I will cover the basics of setting up a CSS file for Foundry to get your journals looking good, and in later videos, I will cover making adjustments per adventure and how to edit the adventure text to be more functional within Foundry. Let's start with the basics. You're going to need Foundry, and I'm going to assume you're playing with the Pathfinder 2nd Edition system and have a basic knowledge of using your Foundry directory. I'm going to assume that instead of writing your own adventure content, you are adapting an existing adventure from Paizo and have the PDF for that adventure. These steps should work for any system, but I'm going to teach you from my experience with Pathfinder. You will also need the World Scripter module and a program to write the code in. I recommend Visual Studio Code, which is free and hasn't failed me so far. I have some further recommendations, but I'll save them for the end of the video. Once you've installed World Scripter in Foundry and Visual Studio on the computer you're working from, you're ready to get started. I'm going to be using Troubles in Otari as my example adventure, so you'll see me pull examples from that adventure during this series of videos. In your Foundry directory, create a folder called CSS. I recommend putting this folder inside your Assets folder. I also recommend making a subfolder in the CSS folder called Fonts. You can put any fonts you plan on using here, and they will be safe in the event that you uninstall or update any modules. I will go into further detail on fonts in a later video. For now, we'll use fonts that come with Foundry or with the Pathfinder 2nd Edition system. Open Visual Studio and press Ctrl-N to create a text file, or click the File menu to do the same thing. Save it as a CSS with whatever name you want, and save it to your Foundry directory in your CSS folder. Whether you're hosting locally or not, make sure you can get the path to that file. Open the World Scripter settings in Foundry and paste the following code into the World Scripter window. Be sure to change the URL path to the location path of your new CSS file. If you're using the tutorial.css file from my GitHub and created the CSS folder inside your assets directory, you should not need to change anything. Now that you've done all that setup, you should be good to go. Just kidding. I will show you how the owl is drawn. We want to start by writing our new CSS file. Our first target will be a common element in a Pathfinder adventure, the readout box. In your CSS file, copy and paste the following code. If you're using the tutorial.css file from my GitHub, the code will already be there. This code will apply some styling to make a box like the readout text sections from a Pathfinder adventure. If you want to increase the accuracy of the look, change the font family from Roboto Condensed to Good OT. Keep in mind you need to have the Good OT font installed in order for that to work. Save your CSS file and overwrite it in your Foundry directory, and then reload Foundry by pressing F5. Now we can open our journal, open the HTML view, and create a div and set the class to readout, like so. Now we can cut and paste the actual text from this section and put it into our div. You can see that the div was created and the style is being applied according to the rules you copied from me. So how did that work? What we just did used a combination of HTML and a CSS file. We applied a class to the element using HTML, which told Foundry to apply the styling we wrote for that class in the CSS file to that element. We specifically wrote the CSS to only apply to div elements, and specifically only div elements that we assigned the readout class, so that the rule doesn't affect every div element in Foundry. I go into more detail on how these CSS style rules are written in my GitHub written guide, but for brevity, I will not dive into those details now. Some other common HTML terminology: P is the most common element and it contains body text. H1, 2, and 3 are all headings. Foundry applies some rules to headings by default, like increasing the font size and making the text bold, and applying an underline. HR stands for horizontal rule and is an element that creates underlines to divide sections. IMG is the element that points Foundry to a picture file and displays that picture. Div is short for division and is a common way of bunching content together in HTML. You can think of it as a container to put multiple other types of elements into. Finally, figure is a specialized container that usually combines a figure caption and an image. I recommend using W3 Schools if you ever have questions about an HTML element or a CSS style rule. I've used that website countless times when I wanted to find out if an idea I had was possible. Now that you've written your first style rule, let's write another. We are going to target a way to insert images into journal pages in a way that doesn't take up the whole page. This is useful for portraits of NPCs, pictures of magic items, or pictures of faction symbols. We are going to use the figure, fig caption, and IMG elements to accomplish this. The class we will give these elements is insert. In Visual Studio, if you hover your cursor over the first line of your style rule, you can see what elements it will affect. So if we hover over figure.insert, you can confirm that it will apply the rules we're going to write to any figure elements that have the class insert. We're going to start by setting the float of the figure to right. This will make the items in the figure container appear on the right side of any other elements, like a paragraph of text. We set the max width to 33%, but you can change that percentage up or down as you wish. This keeps the image from taking up more than a third of the page. Finally, I like to set the margin to 0, so that the text surrounding the image gets close to the image. Foundry already styles the fig caption text to be bold and italicizes it. For my purposes, I want to change the font, make the text always capital letters, and remove the italicization that Foundry applies. To start, we'll set the font family to Gelasio. but you can change that to any font you want that is installed in Foundry. Next, we set the text transform to uppercase. Finally, we set the font style to normal. That removes the italics. Last but not least, I want to remove the border that Foundry places around images by default. To do this, we simply set border to 0 or none. Save your CSS file and overwrite your existing CSS file in your Foundry directory. Now all we need to do is write the HTML code to match our CSS file. In Foundry, open the journal you're editing and insert the image at the top of the page using the default text editor. This lets me find the right image using the Foundry GUI easily. Now I'll create a figure and give it the class insert. Now we can simply copy and paste the image from up above down into your figure. And finally, we add a fig caption below the image and type out the title you're going to give the image. Don't forget to reload your Foundry instance or the CSS changes won't apply. As you can see, the picture is now showing up in the journal styled appropriately, and we're one step closer to looking like the official version. I'll give you one more example before I let you go off on your own. There's one more extremely common element from a Pathfinder adventure that you'll come across, the sidebox. To recreate this through CSS, we'll need to combine some properties from the readout and insert rules we've already written. We want to copy the float and max width elements from the insert and much of the style from the readout box. I'm going to add a background and a slight margin to the left and bottom side so that the body text doesn't get too close to the box. The basic P or paragraph for this side box is identical to the P style from our readout box. This is a variation though. I want to have the first line be styled more like a heading, so I'm going to make sure this rule only applies to P elements that have the class header. You could set this to work automatically by setting it to P : first of type, but I would prefer to set it manually because there may be a box somewhere that doesn't have a title. Another tweak to this rule would be having the style apply to an actual heading like H3, but that would mean that the title of the box will now show up in your journal sidebar, which personally I wouldn't want. If you would want that, it's simple enough to change the P.3 to H3. Once you've saved your CSS file and overwritten that file in Foundry and reloaded Foundry, you're ready to write the code in HTML. In this case, the HTML is very simple. You want a div with the class sidebox, and the first P element needs to have the class header. As you can see, the box has appeared and is being styled according to the rules we set. The header is bold and centered and is a slightly larger font than the body text. Before I let you go, I have some recommendations. Reddit user Lady of Luck has a really helpful guide that I recommend reading. I use their guide and some of their code for this project. I recommend owning an official Pathfinder module. The beginner box is pretty handy, and the wealth of knowledge that can be obtained from the official modules is worth the price by itself. PDF to Foundry is another great module to get your adventures into Foundry in a basic form, and it has been updated to Foundry version 13. All the adventures pre-remaster that never got an official module should be supported in some form. Firefox is in some ways the last refuge for a usable internet browsing experience, and it has some features that make it useful for analyzing PDFs. I usually just drag any PDF I want to look at into Firefox and read it from there. Custom CSS is another useful module if you want to test code on the fly. And if you don't know what font is being used for a piece of text, the Font Finder tool from myfonts.com has never failed me. That's all for this video. In my next video, I will go over how to get these rules looking closer to the official module using fonts and accurate colors. That's all from me for today. Happy pathfinding, Dungeons & Dragoning, or any other system you'd like to customize using CSS in Foundry.